was founded after 9/11 because they recognized that some people did something and that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties.
I sat there listening to them pretend that accountability in the middle of war is impossible, and I couldn't stay quiet. I've been to war. I've carried the weight of combat on my shoulders. I've returned with less of myself than I left with, and I still accounted for every single piece of gear I touched. Yet here in Congress, we're told that holding Ukraine aid accountable is somehow too difficult. No, what's difficult is honesty. And when I reminded them of that, especially when some of these same people defended Ilhan Omar after her anti-Semitic comments, the room got real uncomfortable.
Mr. Chairman, and I too thank you for your leadership. And
hey, so
it's been enjoyable getting to work with you. Could we?
Well, somebody mic needs to mute their mic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, a lot of this argument that we're hearing today against this is about the horror of war and how you can't have an accounting in the midst of the horror of war. Well, as I think about that, there are only a few people on this committee that actually have seen the horror of war. One of them is two people down from me. I know myself, I've made 3 trips to combat. Every time we had to account for every single piece of ammunition, every single piece of equipment, and if something got lost, people were held accountable. You do that in combat. Trust me, you do. And there's no reason why having an accounting, having transparency reported to Congress who writes the check is a bad thing. It doesn't slow down one piece of weapon going to Ukraine. And to say that it does is a fallacy. It's deception. It's dishonesty. The horror of war, yeah, I've seen it. And I still had to make sure that my night vision goggles, my weapon, were all turned in at the end of the mission. Accountability and actually giving stuff to our friends to fight their war are two completely different things. You can have them both at the same time. Absurd to suggest otherwise. One of the other reasons that has been voiced about not supporting this is because comments that were made by the author of this, and I'm not even going to get into those, but I will tell you that everybody who has said those things today as reasons not to support it certainly supported legislation in this committee made by Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, and she made anti-Semitic comments, horrible comments. And yet, I bet you we can pull up the voting record on her legislation, and y'all voted for it. So your arguments make no sense. I'm sorry. The horror of war, you still account for stuff, and you're certainly inconsistent if you're applying the what she said test. I yield.
Gentleman yields back. Is there any other further requests?
Yes,
I sat there looking around that committee room, and I could feel the familiar frustration building. It's the same feeling anyone who has actually worn the uniform gets when we hear people who have never seen a battlefield talk with absolute certainty about what is or isn't possible in a war zone. They speak about combat like it's a theory. I speak about it because I've lived it. And just like so many other veterans, I carry the things that war gives you, whether you ask for them or not. I remember stepping off those helicopters. I remember the sound of rotors fading behind me, and I remember that moment every soldier knows. When the mission is real, there are no pretend rules. There is no room for mistakes. There are no retakes like in politics. There is what you carry, what you can do, and who has your back. Out there, when you lose track of a piece of equipment, when something goes missing, that can get someone killed. Accountability isn't some bureaucratic concept when rounds are flying. It's survival. It's how you come home. So when I listen to some of these members talk about how accountability for U.S. aid to Ukraine is somehow too difficult or too complicated or too burdensome, I realized immediately they are either lying or they simply don't know what they're talking about. And honestly, I don't know which one is worse. Because in war, accountability is not optional. I made 3 combat deployments. 3. And every single time, At the end of every single mission, we accounted for every bullet, every magazine, every sight, every knife, every night vision goggle, every ounce of gear. If something didn't get returned, someone had to explain why. And trust me, you did not want to be that someone. That is the reality of war. Not the speeches. Not the floor statements. The real thing. So to claim that transparency about how billions of dollars of equipment and weapons are being distributed is somehow unreasonable during wartime is dishonest. It's a flat-out deception. It's the kind of thing said by people who think war is a political theater, not a field where people bleed and die. I've held men in my arms. I've watched them take their last breath. I've watched what happens when the mission goes right, and what happens when one small failure ripples outward. And I'll tell you something, accountability is not a luxury. It's respect. Respect for the mission, respect for your brothers, respect for your country. We are writing checks on behalf of every American taxpayer. We are shipping equipment and weapons and resources that belong to the people of this country. And the bare minimum, the absolute bare minimum, is that we track where that equipment goes, who receives it, and whether it is being used for its intended purpose. Then there's the hypocrisy, and I made sure to make that clear. Because it wasn't just that they didn't like the bill. It wasn't just that they didn't like the idea of accountability. It was that they tried to disguise their opposition behind outrage over comments made by the bill's sponsor. Suddenly, they cared about words. Suddenly, they cared about rhetoric. Suddenly, they cared about tone. This from the same people who defended Ilhan Omar over her anti-Semitic statements. The same people who twisted themselves into knots to excuse her, to rationalize her, to pretend she didn't say what everyone knows she said. They supported her legislation. They voted for her bills. They defended her character when it was convenient. And now they claim the moral high ground? No. You don't get to do that. You don't get to ignore anti-Semitism when it's one of your own and then suddenly pretend to be offended when accountability threatens your political comfort. You don't get to selectively apply standards and expect the rest of us to act like we don't notice the double standard staring us in the face. See, accountability isn't just about gear or money. It's about integrity. It's about whether we say what we mean and mean what we say. It's about whether our principles hold up when they become inconvenient. And what I said in that room needed to be said. I reminded them that accountability can happen in war because I've lived it. I reminded them that their sudden outrage over rhetoric is performative. I reminded them that the American people deserve transparency, not excuses dressed up as emotional appeal. And as I looked around at some of the faces, I could see it, the discomfort, the sudden quiet. Because when someone speaks from experience, real experience, the room changes. People know the difference between someone who read about war and someone who has seen it. They hear it. They feel it. That's why I spoke. Not to score points. Not to grandstand. But because accountability, real accountability, is the difference between honoring the sacrifice of those who serve and treating war like a budget line on a spreadsheet. And I'll say it again, if I could do accountability in the middle of combat, if every soldier, every Marine, every sailor, every airman can do it, then Congress can too. And if Congress refuses, it's not because it's impossible. It's because some of them don't want the American people to see the truth. I will always choose the truth.